I guess spending Christmas with your mother just felt unnecessary this year. My daughter-in-law texted me while I stood alone beside baggage claim Carousel 7 at Denver International Airport, watching families reunite under twinkling garlands and oversized wreaths while snow drifted softly against the giant glass windows. I read the message 3 times before my fingers finally loosened around my phone. Around me, children ran into their grandparents' arms, couples laughed beneath blinking holiday lights, and somewhere nearby a choir recording played Silent Night through the terminal speakers. I had flown nearly 1,900 miles from Sarasota, Florida, carrying 2 carefully wrapped gifts in my carry-on and a tin of homemade peppermint bark, tucked safely inside my suitcase because my granddaughter Lily used to call it Grandma Ellie's Christmas magic. Daniel had promised he'd pick me up himself. He'd even texted me that morning before my flight boarded. "Can't wait to see you, Mom." I checked the time again. Nearly 2 hours had passed since my plane landed. My coffee had gone cold 30 minutes ago. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and tried not to notice the way the younger airport employees looked at me with quiet sympathy every time they passed. Finally, another message appeared from Vanessa. Oops. Totally slipped my mind. We're already having dinner with neighbors. Just grab an Uber. That was it. No apology. No concern. Just 12 words that somehow made the entire terminal feel colder than the snowstorm outside. I stared at the screen until it dimmed in my hand. Then before I could even process the ache rising into my chest, a new notification appeared at the top of my phone. Vanessa had posted an Instagram story. I clicked it without thinking. There they were. Daniel carving a honey-glazed ham beside a beautifully decorated dining table. Lily smiling weakly at the camera. Vanessa laughing with a glass of wine in her hand while Christmas music played in the background. The caption read, "Perfect Family Christmas Eve. Perfect Family." I watched the video twice. No empty chair waited for me. No one asked where I was. My son looked comfortable. Relaxed. Like forgetting his 70-year-old mother at the airport wasn't an accident at all. The realization settled slowly, like ice forming across a lake. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was rehearsal. I lowered my phone carefully and looked around the crowded terminal again. Suddenly every family hug felt painfully loud. Every Christmas song sounded mocking. I thought about Noel, my late husband, and the way he used to stand at airport arrivals holding flowers no matter how short the trip had been. "No one waits alone on Christmas," he always said. But Noel had been gone for 4 years now, and somewhere along the way my place inside my own family seemed to disappear with him. Outside the giant airport windows, snow covered the roads in thick white layers while headlights stretched endlessly into the dark Colorado evening. I picked up my suitcase slowly and opened the Uber app myself. If they wanted me to feel forgotten, I refused to let them see me break. The Uber driver was kind enough not to ask questions. He only adjusted the rearview mirror once when he saw me quietly wiping beneath my eyes with the sleeve of my coat. Outside, Denver looked like a Christmas postcard. Snow covered the rooftops of tidy suburban homes. White lights wrapped around bare trees. Inflatable snowmen and glowing nativity scenes stood proudly in frozen front yards as we drove farther away from the airport. I remembered when Daniel was little and used to press his face against car windows every December, counting Christmas lights like they were treasures. "That house wins," he would whisper every few blocks. Back then, he never let a single holiday pass without calling me his favorite person in the world. The neighborhood where he lived now looked expensive in the careful, polished way newer developments always do. Large homes with identical stone mailboxes, perfect sidewalks, matching wreaths hanging on every front door. The driver pulled into the driveway at exactly 8:22. I noticed immediately that every light inside the house was glowing warmly except the upstairs guest room window. The room where I always stayed was dark. Vanessa opened the front door before I even reached the porch. "There you are," she said with a bright smile that never reached her eyes. Weather must have delayed things. I stood there for a moment holding my suitcase while snow melted quietly onto the front steps around me. She knew my flight had landed on time. We both knew it. But I nodded anyway because suddenly I felt too tired to argue about reality itself. The smell of cinnamon candles and roasted ham drifted from inside the house. Somewhere deeper in the living room, Christmas music played softly beneath the sound of football commentators on television. Daniel appeared briefly near the hallway entrance. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, like I had just arrived from across town instead of across the country. He hugged me quickly with one arm before looking back toward the television. "Road's bad." I almost laughed at that. Instead I said, "Not too bad." Vanessa stepped aside finally and I rolled my suitcase into the hallway. That was when I noticed the coat rack. 4 winter coats hung there neatly. Vanessa's cream wool coat, Daniel's navy parka, Lily's red jacket, even little Mason's tiny blue coat with dinosaur patches. Mine was not there because no one had expected me to arrive. My chest tightened again. "I hope you do not mind," Vanessa said while smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. "But we turned the guest room into storage since you skipped Thanksgiving." "Skip Thanksgiving?" As if I had chosen not to come after they changed the date 2 days beforehand. She led me upstairs anyway. The room looked nothing like before. Plastic bins filled with holiday decorations lined the walls. Wrapping paper tubes leaned in the corner beside unopened delivery boxes. A treadmill now sat where my bed used to be. The only place left for me was a narrow air mattress already laid out beside stacked cartons labeled winter decor. I set my suitcase down carefully without speaking. Then from the hallway, I heard Lily's small voice drift toward the room. "Mom," she whispered nervously, "I thought Grandma was not coming this year." Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind adults create when a child accidentally tells the truth. I did not sleep much that night. The air mattress shifted every time I moved, the plastic underneath creaking softly beside stacks of Christmas decorations that smelled faintly like dust and artificial pine. Around midnight I heard laughter downstairs. Vanessa had invited neighbors over for drinks after I went upstairs, and through the heating vents I could hear fragments of conversation rising into the dark room above me. Every now and then Daniel laughed too. Not once did either of them come upstairs to check on me. I stared at the ceiling for hours while snow tapped gently against the guest room window. Somewhere near 2 in the morning, I realized something that hurt far more than being forgotten at the airport. None of this had happened suddenly. Families do not wake up one morning and decide to erase someone overnight. It happens slowly, quietly, one missing invitation at a time. I thought back to Lily's piano recital last spring. Vanessa had called me the night before sounding flustered. "Oh no, did Daniel forget to tell you it was rescheduled?" she had asked sweetly. "The school changed everything last minute." Later I saw photos online dated the exact same evening she claimed it had been postponed. I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when they suddenly decided to spend the holiday with Vanessa's sister in Aspen, after I had already bought groceries for 12 people. Daniel had sounded uncomfortable on the phone then too. "You understand, Mom," he kept saying. "It is just easier this year." Easier. That word followed me often now. Last Christmas they mailed my gifts instead of inviting me. Vanessa blamed airline prices and crowded schedules. On Mother's Day, Daniel called nearly 6 hours late while shopping at an outdoor mall with her family. Even my 70th birthday dinner somehow became a rushed brunch squeezed between Mason's soccer practice and a neighborhood barbecue Vanessa did not want to miss. At the time I convinced myself these were normal changes. Children grow up. Families become busy. Wives create new traditions. That is what I told myself every time disappointment settled quietly into my chest. But lying there beside boxes of tangled Christmas lights and unopened decorations, I finally saw the pattern clearly. Vanessa never pushed me out directly. She operated in the spaces between politeness and exclusion. She smiled while removing me piece by piece from my own family. The next morning I woke early before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I walked carefully into the kitchen wearing my robe and found Lily sitting alone at the counter eating cereal beneath the soft glow of the under-cabinet lights. Her hair looked messy from sleep and she wore oversized red plaid pajamas. When she saw me, her face brightened with genuine relief. "Grandma Ellie," she whispered, "I am really glad you came." For the first time since landing in Denver, someone sounded like they meant it. Lily kept glancing nervously toward the staircase while she ate her cereal, like she was afraid someone might walk in and catch us talking. Outside the kitchen windows, snow blanketed the backyard in untouched white layers, and the first pale streaks of morning light stretched across the neighboring rooftops. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the expensive machine Vanessa loved to display on social media but never seemed to use herself. The kitchen smelled faintly like cinnamon and burnt toast. "Your mother still asleep?" I asked gently. Lily nodded without looking up. "She stayed up late with the neighbors." There was something careful in the way she said it, like she had already learned how to navigate moods inside this house. At 15, she reminded me more and more of Daniel when he was young. Quiet eyes. Thoughtful pauses. The kind of child who noticed tension even when adults tried to hide it beneath polite smiles. "I really thought you were not coming," she admitted softly after a moment. "Mom said traveling was too hard for you now." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug to steady them. "Did she?" Lily nodded again. "She said Florida was better for you because you get confused in airports." The words landed harder than I expected. Confused. As if I had become fragile without realizing it myself. As if 70 meant incapable. I looked down at the steam rising from my coffee and suddenly remembered the conversation I overheard 6 months earlier during a phone call with Daniel. He had sounded distracted while speaking to me. Vanessa's voice carried faintly in the background. "She cannot keep handling that house alone forever," she had said, not realizing I could hear her through the speaker. At the time I brushed it aside. Now every small comment returned with sharper edges. Lily hesitated before sliding her phone quietly across the kitchen counter toward me. "Grandma," she whispered, "I think you should see this." On the screen was a family group chat titled The Whitmores. Christmas dinner plans filled the messages. Grocery lists. Seating arrangements. Photos of wrapped presents stacked beneath the tree. Vanessa had written 3 days earlier, "Please do not mention airport pickup in front of Eleanor." I told her Daniel might be busy. My stomach tightened. Beneath it, Daniel had simply replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That hurt more than Vanessa's message itself. Not cruelty. Not anger. Indifference. Lily quickly pulled the phone back when footsteps sounded upstairs. "I probably should not have shown you that," she said nervously. I reached across the counter and squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for being honest with me." She looked down at the table for a long moment before speaking again. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "did Dad used to be different?" The question lingered between us while sunlight slowly filled the kitchen. I thought about the little boy who once cried when I left him at kindergarten. The teenager who called every Sunday from college. The young man who danced with me in the driveway after Noel built our first backyard deck. "Yes," I said finally. "He really did." Upstairs, I heard Vanessa laughing loudly as another bedroom door opened. And for the first time since arriving in Denver, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining any of this at all. The rest of Christmas Eve unfolded like a performance where everyone already knew their lines except me. Vanessa moved through the house with effortless polish, refilling wine glasses, adjusting silverware, laughing too loudly whenever neighbors complimented the decorations. Every surface looked carefully arranged for photographs. Matching stockings hung across the fireplace mantel. Gold ribbon curled around candle holders. The dining table looked like something copied from a magazine spread, complete with folded linen napkins tied by tiny pine branches. And yet nothing inside the house felt warm. Not really. During dinner, Vanessa kept steering conversations toward aging in that falsely casual way people do when they want to plant an idea without appearing cruel. I read an article saying Florida heat can really affect memory in older adults, she mentioned while cutting her ham into perfect squares. A few minutes later she smiled toward me again. "Traveling during winter storms at your age must feel exhausting." I noticed Daniel never corrected her. He just kept eating quietly while football highlights flickered from the living room television nearby. Even Mason sensed something uncomfortable in the air because the usually energetic 8-year-old barely spoke during dinner. Lily avoided looking at either parent altogether. After dessert, neighbors slowly filtered out into the snowy night carrying foil containers of leftovers and exchanging cheerful holiday greetings at the front door. By 11 o'clock the house finally grew quiet. Vanessa went upstairs first. Daniel stayed behind in the kitchen rinsing dishes while I sat alone near the fireplace pretending to read an old issue of Southern Living magazine left on the coffee table. The Christmas tree lights reflected softly against the dark windows, turning the living room gold and blue. Then I heard it. "We need to talk about Florida after the holidays," Vanessa whispered sharply from the upstairs hallway. Her voice traveled clearly through the open staircase. The house is too much for her now. You know that. I froze without moving my eyes from the magazine page. Daniel answered lower this time. Not tonight. Then when? Vanessa snapped quietly. If she sells that place, everything gets easier. Assisted living near us would solve all of this. Assisted living. The word settled heavily into the room around me. I thought about my little yellow house in Sarasota. My herb garden near the back patio. Noel's wind chime still hanging beside the lanai. The neighbor who brought over lemon bars every Sunday afternoon. My entire life reduced to all of this. Daniel sighed deeply upstairs. I just do not want her upset. Vanessa laughed softly at that. Daniel, she is lonely and overwhelmed. She will agree eventually if you stop making this emotional. Emotional. Funny how women like Vanessa always use that word when discussing someone else's pain. I heard their bedroom door close moments later. Downstairs, the fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace while snow continued falling beyond the windows. I sat there for a long time without turning a single page of the magazine in my lap. Then slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone. There was one person I suddenly needed to speak to before Christmas morning arrived. Howard Green. Noel's attorney for nearly 30 years. The man who once told me quietly after Noel's funeral, "Your husband prepared for more than you realize." I waited until nearly midnight before sending Howard Green a short message. I did not explain everything. I only wrote, "Howard, I think Noel may have seen this coming." The reply arrived less than 10 minutes later. "Call me in the morning." Privately. I barely slept after that. The air mattress felt colder than the night before, and every creak of the house seemed louder in the darkness. Around 6:30 Christmas morning, I slipped quietly downstairs while the rest of the house still slept. Snow continued falling beyond the kitchen windows, covering the backyard fence in thick white drifts. The world outside looked peaceful in the way winter mornings sometimes do, as if nothing painful could possibly exist beneath all that clean white silence. I wrapped myself in my cardigan and stepped onto the back patio with my phone. My breath curled into the freezing air while Howard answered on the second ring. "Eleanor," he said gently, his voice older now but still steady. "I had a feeling someday you might call me about this." I closed my eyes briefly. "About what exactly?" There was a pause before he spoke again. "Noel worried that once he was gone, people might start treating you differently." The cold seemed sharper suddenly. "He never told me that." "Because he loved your son," Howard replied quietly. "He wanted to believe Daniel would always protect you the same way he did." Snowflakes landed softly across the patio railing while I listened. Howard explained that 2 years before Noel passed away, he quietly adjusted several details inside the family trust. Not dramatic changes, protective ones. If evidence of coercion, manipulation, or financial pressure against me ever surfaced, the trust allowed assets to be redirected immediately at my discretion, including the Sarasota house, including the investment accounts Vanessa clearly assumed would eventually pass through Daniel. My fingers tightened around the phone. "He thought this far ahead?" Howard sighed softly. "Eleanor, your husband noticed things before you did. Especially after that incident with the refinance paperwork." I frowned. "What refinance paperwork?" "Daniel requested information about adding his name to the Florida property 6 months before Noel died," Howard explained carefully. "Noel refused immediately." I stared out across the snow-covered yard while something heavy settled quietly inside me. Daniel had never mentioned any of this. Not once. Howard continued speaking in the calm, measured tone attorneys use when discussing painful truths. "Noel made me promise not to involve you unless it became necessary. But he was very clear about one thing." I swallowed hard. "What was that?" Howard's answer came softly. "He said loneliness makes good people vulnerable, and he never wanted anyone using yours against you." For several seconds I could not speak at all. I thought about Noel building shelves in our garage every summer. Noel warming my car before church on cold mornings. Noel waiting at airport arrivals with flowers in his hands because he believed nobody should arrive alone. Even now, for years after losing him, he was still trying to protect me from a distance I could not cross myself. Inside the house, I suddenly heard footsteps moving upstairs. Vanessa was awake. I straightened slowly against the cold patio railing while Howard spoke one final sentence. Eleanor, you do not owe anyone your silence simply because they are family. Then the back door slid open behind me, and Vanessa's voice cut through the freezing morning air. There you are, she said brightly. We were wondering where you disappeared to. Vanessa stood in the doorway wrapped in a cream-colored robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill back in Sarasota. Her blonde hair looked perfectly brushed already, as if she woke up prepared for photographs instead of Christmas morning with family. Behind her, warm light spilled across the patio snow while the smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen. I slipped my phone calmly into my cardigan pocket. Just getting some fresh air, I said. She smiled, but her eyes moved quickly toward the phone before returning to my face again. Well, come inside before you freeze. Lily is opening presents soon. That surprised me slightly. Usually Vanessa preferred carefully staged family moments without me nearby. But when I walked back inside, I immediately understood why she suddenly wanted me present. The living room looked immaculate. Wrapped gifts arranged perfectly beneath the tree. Matching mugs of hot chocolate already waiting on the coffee table. Daniel sat beside the fireplace wearing a red flannel shirt Vanessa probably bought specifically for holiday pictures. Everything felt prepared. Curated. Like a family commercial. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor near the tree, though the moment she saw me her shoulders relaxed visibly. Mason bounced excitedly beside her holding a candy cane nearly the size of his arm. Vanessa handed me a mug with a bright smile. There she is, she announced cheerfully. Now Christmas can officially start. I noticed her phone already propped discreetly against a candle holder recording video. Daniel looked tired. Not guilty exactly. Just emotionally absent in the way people become when avoiding uncomfortable truths for too long. Presents began opening one by one while Vanessa narrated nearly everything for the camera. Show Grandma what Mommy picked out, she kept telling the children. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every laugh carefully measured. Then Lily quietly handed me a small rectangular box wrapped in silver paper. This one is from me, she said softly. Inside was a framed photograph from 6 years ago. Daniel, Lily, Noelle, and me standing barefoot on Siesta Key Beach at sunset. Noelle's arm around my shoulders. Daniel smiling genuinely. Lily small enough to sit on my hip. For a moment the room disappeared completely. I remembered that evening perfectly. Noelle grilling shrimp skewers afterward while Daniel played music from an old portable speaker. Nobody checking phones. Nobody rushing somewhere else. Just family. Real family. I found it in Dad's office drawer, Lily explained quietly. I thought maybe you should have it. Across the room, Vanessa's smile tightened almost invisibly. She had probably hoped the morning would reinforce her version of the family story. Controlled. Polished. Comfortable. Instead, Lily had just placed the past directly into my hands. Daniel stared at the photograph longer than anyone else. Something shifted slightly in his expression then. Not dramatic. Just enough for me to notice. A flicker of shame perhaps. Or memory. Vanessa immediately stood up clapping her hands together too brightly. Okay, she announced quickly. Time for breakfast before the cinnamon rolls get cold. But the atmosphere had already changed. Quietly. Irreversibly. Because for the first time since I arrived in Denver, someone had reminded my son what our family used to feel like before everything became performance instead of love. Breakfast felt strangely quiet after that. Vanessa kept trying to pull everyone back into the cheerful rhythm she preferred, but something invisible had shifted around the table. Even the children seemed to feel it. Snow continued falling outside while cinnamon rolls cooled untouched beside bowls of fruit and scrambled eggs. Daniel barely spoke during the meal. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the framed beach photograph sitting beside my coffee cup. I noticed Vanessa watching him notice it. That seemed to bother her more than anything else. Around noon she suddenly brightened again and stood from the table with exaggerated excitement. Before we forget, she said, clasping her hands together, we have one more surprise gift this year. Her voice carried the polished energy of someone stepping back into control. She disappeared briefly upstairs before returning with a large white envelope tied carefully with gold ribbon. This, she announced while handing it toward me, Is for your future. I accepted the envelope slowly. The room grew still. Even Mason stopped chewing his candy cane. Inside was a glossy brochure for an assisted living community just outside Denver. Smiling silver-haired couples filled the pages. Gardening classes. Bingo nights. Fitness programs. Beneath the brochure sat a typesheet listing monthly pricing plans and room layouts. Vanessa leaned forward eagerly. It is wonderful there, Eleanor. They even have transportation services and on-site medical staff. Daniel and I thought maybe after the holidays we could fly down to Florida and help you start preparing the house for sale. Help you start preparing the house for sale. She said it casually, as if discussing spring cleaning instead of dismantling my entire life. I looked toward Daniel. He did not meet my eyes. Mom, he said quietly, we just think it might be easier for you now. Easier again. That word returned like a stain nobody wanted to acknowledge. For a moment nobody moved. Then Lily spoke softly from across the table. Grandma does not need help living. Vanessa's smile froze instantly. Sweetheart, she replied carefully. Adults are talking. But Lily did not look away this time. No, she said quietly. You are deciding things for her. The room went silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel finally looked up sharply. Vanessa laughed too quickly, waving one hand dismissively. Nobody is deciding anything. We are just planning ahead because we care. Care. Funny how cruelty often arrived wrapped in polite words and expensive brochures. I lowered the papers calmly onto the table beside my untouched coffee. Then I reached into my purse and removed another envelope. Smaller. Plain cream-colored paper with Howard Green's law office printed neatly across the front. Vanessa's expression changed almost immediately when she saw the attorney's name. Daniel frowned in confusion. I placed the envelope carefully in front of me without opening it yet. Actually, I said softly, Noelle and I already planned ahead years ago. For the first time since Christmas morning began, Vanessa looked genuinely uncertain. Not angry. Not annoyed. Afraid. The room stayed completely still after I said Noelle's name. Outside, snow continued drifting past the dining room windows in slow, quiet waves, covering the neighborhood in soft white layers while inside the warmth suddenly felt fragile and thin. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee mug. Daniel stared at the cream-colored envelope in front of me like it had appeared out of nowhere. Even Mason looked confused enough to stop fidgeting in his chair. I slid the envelope across the table calmly toward Daniel. Go ahead, I said softly. Read it. His hands moved slower than usual as he opened it. I watched his face carefully while his eyes scanned the first page. Confusion came first. Then surprise. Then something much heavier. Vanessa leaned closer immediately. What is it? She asked too quickly. Daniel swallowed hard before answering. It is from Howard. His voice sounded strained now. Dad updated the trust before he died. Vanessa's expression sharpened instantly. Updated how? Daniel kept reading silently for another moment before finally lowering the papers onto the table. If Mom experiences financial coercion, manipulation, or pressure involving property decisions, ownership transfers automatically move into protected distribution. Vanessa blinked. Protected distribution? I folded my hands quietly in my lap. Noelle created safeguards, I explained calmly. The Sarasota house cannot be sold or transferred under family pressure. Neither can the investment accounts. Nobody spoke for several seconds. I could almost hear Vanessa recalculating every conversation she had pushed over the last 2 years. That is ridiculous, she said finally with a short, nervous laugh. Nobody is pressuring anyone. Lily looked down at her plate. Daniel still had not looked at me directly. I reached into my purse again and removed my phone. Slowly, carefully, I opened the screenshot Lily showed me earlier and placed it beside the legal documents on the table. Vanessa's group chat message sat clearly on the screen. Please do not mention airport pickup in front of Eleanor. The color drained from Daniel's face immediately. Vanessa reacted first. That was taken out of context. Her voice rose too fast now. I only meant because travel details confuse her sometimes. Enough, Daniel said quietly. It was the first firm word he had spoken all morning. Vanessa turned toward him in disbelief. Daniel, seriously? He did not answer her right away. Instead, he stared down at the beach photograph Lily gave me earlier. His younger self smiled back from the frame beside Noelle under a Florida sunset that suddenly felt very far away. Did you really leave my mother alone at the airport on purpose? He asked finally. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Oh please. She is making this emotional again. Emotional. There was that word one last time. But this time Daniel flinched when he heard it. I saw it clearly. The realization settling slowly behind his eyes. Not just what Vanessa had done, but what he allowed by staying silent beside her for years. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Lily stood up quietly from the table and walked around to my side. She slipped her hand gently into mine without saying a word. Across from us, Vanessa suddenly looked smaller somehow. Not powerless exactly, just exposed. I looked toward my son one final time and saw tears gathering in his eyes for the first time since Noelle's funeral 4 years earlier. Mom, he whispered hoarsely. I did not see it happening. I nodded slowly because the truth was I believed him. Families rarely fall apart in one terrible moment. Most disappear slowly. One ignored phone call. One missing invitation. One empty airport arrival at a time. And by the time someone finally notices, the damage has already learned how to live comfortably inside the silence.